Hey guys, tonight we're standing at the mouth of a cave in what will one day be called southwestern France. About 17,000 years ago, the air outside is crisp, smelling faintly of pine and the damp musk of autumn rain, but inside the opening it's already cooler, the wind cut off by rock. A faint orange glow flickers against the stone ahead, animal fat lamps cupped in rough hands, and shadows dance like restless spirits across the uneven walls. Someone ahead of you ducks low, disappearing into the narrow passage. You follow, the rough stone scraping your shoulder. Your breath catches, not just from the climb, but from the anticipation of what you're about to see. The space suddenly opens up, the ceiling arches above you like the inside of a stone cathedral, and there it is, your first glimpse. Bison, horses, deer, painted in rich earth tones, leap across the rock as if frozen mid-gallop. They're larger than life, some stretching meters long, their shapes formed from sweeping lines and shaded curves. They seem alive. You realize these creatures have been running across this wall for longer than any city has existed, longer than metal has been shaped, longer than farming has tamed a single field. And you standing here in your sneakers and fleece jacket, probably won't survive 5 minutes if we drop you in the real ice age. No supermarket, no Wi-Fi, and the local wildlife is more likely to make a meal of you than pose for a selfie. But here you are, sharing the same dim light and the same view as people who lived and died millennia before you. If you're enjoying this journey into humanity's oldest stories, give this video a like. It's the easiest way to help keep these tales alive. Drop your location and the local time in the comments, so we can see how far these ancient walls are reaching tonight. Now take a step closer, smell the faint mineral tang of the rock, the smoky residue from ancient lamps. The walls ripple and bulge, the shapes of the animals following the natural curves of the cave, as if the rock itself is alive. That's the magic. These artists didn't just paint on the stone, they painted with it, letting the surfaces breathe life into the animals. Your torchlight moves, and the images shift. One bison's flank seems to swell as the shadows pass, a trick the painter may have intended. Another figure, a horse, emerges only when the light catches it at the right angle, revealing strokes so fine you wonder how they even saw to make them in the dark. The air is heavy with silence, broken only by the faint drip of water in the distance. You imagine the first time this chamber was lit by firelight thousands of years ago. The people, your distant ancestors, would have gasped just as you did. Perhaps they whispered prayers, or maybe they danced, the flickering light making the painted animals seem to move. Their feet would have been bare, toes gripping the cold, uneven floor, their skin prickling with the cave's chill. Behind you, the tunnel fades into darkness, a reminder that this chamber is just one of many. Some of the most incredible paintings are hidden deeper, in spaces so narrow you must crawl to reach them. The decision to paint there wasn't casual. Every image was placed with intent, whether to protect it, hide it from outsiders, or bring it closer to whatever spirit world they believed existed in the stone. As you stand here, you start to realize something else. This isn't just decoration, this is communication. The people who painted these walls didn't know you, but they still reached across time to speak in the only way they could. The language is image, and somehow you understand it. Far ahead, deeper in the cave, someone is already moving on, their torchlight bouncing away. You follow, because this first glimpse is just the beginning. The walls here have more to say, and the deeper you go, the older the voice becomes. You follow the torchlight into the narrowing tunnel, the floor damp beneath your boots and the air tightening with every step. The glow ahead flickers and reveals another chamber, smaller than the first, but equally alive with markings. Now you begin to think about where all of this art exists, not just here but scattered across the world, hidden in stone. The great painted caves aren't random holes in the earth. They're often found in landscapes shaped by rivers, cliffs and limestone hills, places where water and time have carved intricate systems beneath the surface. In Europe, some of the most famous sites lie in France and Spain. Lascaux, Chauvet, Altamira, each was a fortress of art long before anyone thought to name them. You can picture the moment of rediscovery, a hunter's dog chasing a rabbit into a hole in 1940, boys wriggling in after it, and finding the vaults of Lascaux glowing with images. But it's not just Europe. In Indonesia, on the island of Sulawesi, there's a hand stencil that's at least 40,000 years old. In Namibia's Apollo 11 cave, animal figures in ochre stretch across the rock. In northern Australia, under rock shelters that feel like open-air cathedrals, the Guion figures dance in fine, ochre red lines. These are not isolated sparks, they are the same fire lit in different corners of the world. What's striking is how often these sites were discovered by accident. a shepherd sheltering from the rain, a miner breaking into a new chamber, a child playing near a hillside, and each time the reaction is the same, a sense that you've stepped somewhere you shouldn't, into a place meant for another time. The locations themselves tell part of the story. Many caves are difficult to reach, even today. Some are halfway up cliffs, others are hidden in dense forest, and a few require crawling through tunnels barely wide enough for your shoulders. Why paint in places like these? Maybe the difficulty was part of the meaning. Perhaps the journey into darkness mirrored the journey into whatever realm they believed the art could touch. You imagine a group of hunters in Ice Age Europe approaching a cave entrance. They've walked miles across frozen ground, carrying torches made from twisted pine resin. The mouth of the cave yawns black before them, an opening in the earth that swallows the daylight. The air that drifts out is colder still, smelling faintly of stone and earth. They pause, adjusting the bundles on their backs, pigment, tools, maybe food to last them inside. Then they step forward, crossing into the half-light where human voices fade, and the sounds of dripping water take over. Some caves are so remote they weren't found again for tens of thousands of years. That isolation is part of why their art survived. In the Franco-Cantabrian region, limestone walls shielded paintings from wind, rain and sunlight. In the Australian outback, overhanging cliffs and dry air preserved ochre images for millennia. In Indonesia, calcium deposits formed thin veils over handprints, sealing them away like a natural time capsule. You find yourself thinking about what we've missed. For every Lascaux or Altamira, there must be hundreds of sites that collapsed, flooded, or wore away before anyone alive today could see them. Some may still be out there, sealed behind rockfalls or hidden in uncharted hills, their walls waiting in darkness for the next lucky accident. Your guide, if you can call the man ahead with the torch a guide, pauses at a fork in the passage. One tunnel slopes steeply down into shadow, the other is narrow, lined with jagged stone. He chooses the narrow path, and you have to turn sideways to squeeze through. The stone is cool on your palms, gritty with ancient dust. Then just as you start wondering how far you've come from the surface, the passage widens again into a chamber, its walls alive with ochre and charcoal. The map of prehistoric art is scattered across continents, but every location shares something: the deep silence, the scent of stone and the feeling that someone was here before you, watching, waiting and leaving behind a message. You're not just walking through a cave, you're stepping into a network of voices that once spanned the globe. You stand still in the new chamber, letting your torchlight sweep slowly over the walls. The images here are darker, the colors richer, and somehow older looking, though your eyes can't yet measure time the way science can. That's the next mystery: how we know when these works were made. Dating cave paintings isn't like checking a label or reading a carved year. These walls are silent about the calendar, and the artists didn't leave signatures. So archaeologists have had to learn to pull clues from the smallest traces. In the early days, guesses were based on style alone. If a certain type of bison looked like the ones from another cave, they might be roughly the same age, but style can be deceiving, and so better methods were needed. Radiocarbon dating was the first breakthrough. If a pigment was made with charcoal from burnt wood, that carbon could be tested to measure its age. Scientists scrape tiny samples from the painted surface, then calculate how much of the carbon-14 isotope has decayed. It's delicate work. Too much scraping and you damage the art, too little and you can't get a reading. But not every painting uses organic material. Many were made with minerals like ochre or manganese, which can't be radiocarbon dated. That's where uranium-thorium dating comes in. Water seeps through the cave walls, leaving thin films of calcite over time. If this layer formed over a painting, it can be dated instead, telling us the art is at least as old as the calcite. This method revealed that some of the red hand stencils in Spain's El Castillo cave are more than 40,000 years old, which means they could have been painted by Neanderthals. There are also indirect clues. Layers of sediment on the cave floor can contain charcoal from torches used by the painters. These can be dated, narrowing the window in which the paintings were made. Even the tools, bones, shells, grinding stones found nearby can help fix a time frame. It's not always straightforward. Sometimes graffiti from the 1800s sits right next to Ice Age art, and separating one from the other is part detective work, part patience. In other cases, later cultures have repainted over older ones, adding their own animals, symbols or handprints to the same names. The result is a palimpsest, a layered history in pigment. Standing here, you realize the age numbers: 17,000 years, 30,000 years, 45,000 years, aren't just trivia. They're the span of human memory written in stone. The people who painted here lived before writing, before farming, before metal tools. They survived by hunting, gathering and knowing the land as intimately as you know your own living room. And yet, despite the gulf of time, you can still see their thoughts in lines and colors. You run your fingers just above the rock, careful not to touch the pigment. Somewhere inside that paint is the charcoal of a fire long burned to ash, or the ground-up remains of a mineral pulled from the earth by hands that may not even have been fully modern human. A flicker of your torch catches on a faint outline high above head height. Someone had to stand on a stone or lift a torch for the artist to see what they were doing. Even that moment is frozen here, the sound of feet shifting on stone, the glow of firelight bouncing off wet walls, the smell of smoke curling up to the ceiling. Dating these paintings tells us when they were made, but it also tells us something deeper. These weren't random marks. The artists came back to certain caves again and again, over hundreds or even thousands of years, adding new images to spaces already filled with meaning. Imagine a place so important that people who never met each other, generations apart, still found their way to the same wall in the same dark chamber, to paint beside the same bison or handprint. You take a slow breath, realizing that this age, this span of years, is not a number you can feel, but in the quiet here, with only the drip of water and the smell of rock, you start to understand it in the way the artists did, not as a date but as a presence that lives in the walls. The torchlight trembles as you lift it higher, and for a moment you swear the eyes of a painted horse meet yours. It's a strange feeling, knowing someone made that gaze tens of thousands of years ago, yet it still finds you here. The question presses in, who were these painters? Archaeologists can't introduce you to them by name, but they've pieced together clues. The people who ventured into these caves were part of small hunter-gatherer bands. These groups might number 20 to 40 individuals, bound by kinship, shared survival, and the seasonal rhythm of the land. Most lived in temporary shelters, tents of hide, windbreaks of brush or shallow rock overhangs, moving with the herds and the changing weather. But when the time came for something more permanent than shelter, they came here, underground into stone. For years researchers assumed the artists were adult men, hunters recording the animals they stalked, but that theory has been dismantled, layer by layer. One of the clearest breakthroughs came from hand stencils. By measuring the relative lengths of fingers, scientists can often determine whether a hand belonged to a male or female, adult or child. Many of the stencils turn out to be women's hands. Some are children's. This suggests that cave painting wasn't an exclusive man's job, but a shared act, perhaps a community event where different roles intertwined. Picture it, a woman grinding ochre on a flat stone while her child plays nearby, smearing fingers in the pigment. An older hunter crouches beside her, shaping a reed tube for blowing pigment. Another person, maybe the group's most skilled artist, tests the curve of the wall for how it might match the flank of a bison. It's tempting to think of the artist as a single role, but here it may have been more fluid. In some places the skill is extraordinary, proportions perfect, shading clever, use of perspective ahead of its time. In others the figures are simpler, rough outlines of animals or hands. This variety suggests that not all painters were equal in skill or purpose. Some may have been apprentices, others ritual specialists, some simply marking their presence before moving on. Their physical traits come to you in fragments, shorter than most modern humans, but strong from walking and carrying loads. The painters worked by torchlight, kneeling or lying against cold stone, their breath misting in the still air. Their clothes were stitched hides, fur-lined against the chill, but inside the cave they might remove heavy layers to move freely, revealing tunics or wraps stained with pigment dust. Their hair tied back, braided or loose, would catch flecks of ochre in the firelight. And then there's the question of age. We know from footprints preserved in soft cave floors that some were made by teenagers, or even children. A famous trail in Tuc-de-Bear cave shows a small set of bare footprints walking alongside larger ones, deep in the cave's most remote chambers. What were they doing there? Learning, participating, watching in awe as images appeared under skilled hands. It's possible that the act of painting wasn't just about skill, but about belonging, marking yourself as part of the group, part of a tradition. If that's true, then the artists weren't anonymous. They were recognized and remembered within their own circles, even if their names have long dissolved into the dust of the cave floor. Standing in their place now, you feel the human continuity. The people who painted these walls laughed, argued, told stories, comforted children, and grieved their dead. They carried all the same emotions you do, but without the distractions of screens or schedules. When they stood here, Every mark they made was a choice, and every choice was meant to last. The horse's painted eye seems to watch you a moment longer before you move deeper into the chamber, leaving it to gaze at the next traveler who dares to meet it across the span of thousands of years. Your guide's torch wavers, and the warm glow plays over a scatter of powder near the base of the wall. You crouch down and see it, pigment dust, dark against the pale floor. It's as if the last painter just walked away, leaving the remains of their palette behind. This is where the story shifts from who painted to what they painted with. Every color in these caves came from the earth. Ochre was the star, an iron-rich mineral that could be found in shades ranging from deep crimson to bright yellow. To get it, you'd start with raw rock, prying it from exposed seams in cliff faces, or digging it out of soft soil deposits. Once gathered, it was ground down on flat stones into fine powder, sometimes mixed with animal fat, water, or even saliva to help it stick. Black came mostly from charcoal, burned wood from their own campfires, or from manganese dioxide, a mineral they chipped from rock deposits. Manganese gave a rich, velvety black that could also shift toward violet. White, though rarer, came from powdered clay or ground calcite. Together, these basic pigments, red, yellow, black, white, formed the Paleolithic color wheel. You imagine the process: a group walking along a riverbank, scanning for the glint of ochre in the soil. They carry antler picks, stone hammers, woven pouches. When they find a good deposit, they chip away at it until their hands are stained red or yellow, their palms gritty with mineral dust. Back at camp, the ochre is pounded in shallow stone basins, the rhythmic tap-tap-tap blending with the sounds of the fire and conversation. The binders, those secret ingredients that turned powder into paint, came from what was at hand. Animal fat gave the pigment a smooth texture and helped it cling to damp stone. Water made it easy to spread, but prone to dripping. Plant sap or blood may have been used for special effects or deeper tones. The choice of binder could change the pigment's finish: matte, glossy, or slightly translucent. Then there were the tools. Brushes could be made from chewed sticks, bunches of animal hair bound with sinew, or plant fibers. For spraying pigment, they used hollow bird bones or reeds, blowing the colored dust onto the wall in a fine mist. For engraving, sharp flints carved lines into the rock, sometimes filled with pigment afterward to make them stand out. Even their fingers became tools, smearing, stippling, and dragging lines into the damp paint. Sometimes they used the cave itself as part of the design. A bulge in the wall might become the shoulder of a bison. A deep crack could serve as the outline of an antelope's horn. These choices weren't random. They were observations born from spending time in these spaces, reading the stone as if it were a living thing. Pigment gathering wasn't a side chore. It could be a journey in itself. Some ochre found in caves has been traced to sources more than 100 kilometers away, meaning someone carried it across valleys, rivers, and ridges. That's a lot of effort for a color, which tells you it matters. And here's the thing: this same ochre shows up not just in paintings but in burials, body decoration, and perhaps even medicine. It wasn't just paint, it was a substance with layers of meaning. To paint with ochre was to draw from the earth's blood, to leave a mark that carried both beauty and significance. You brush your hand lightly over the rock beside you, no pigment here, just cool stone, and try to imagine mixing these colors by firelight, testing the thickness, adjusting the shade. Somewhere between gathering the pigment and setting it on the wall, it became more than preparation, it became ceremony. Your guide steps forward again, the torch casting long shadows. Ahead, the walls seem to darken, not from shadow, but from pigment so densely applied, it's almost black. This is where the techniques come alive. The chamber narrows, forcing you to duck. The torchlight trembles over the wall and suddenly you see it. Layers of movement frozen in stone. A bison's flank ripples with shading so smooth you'd swear the animal was breathing. This is where you begin to understand the skill behind the paintings. Cave art wasn't a matter of smearing color and hoping for the best. These artists worked with precision, using techniques that wouldn't look out of place in a modern art class. One of the simplest and most haunting was the hand stencil. The artist would place their hand flat against the stone, then blow pigment around it through a hollow bone or reed, leaving a perfect silhouette once the hand was lifted away. Sometimes the stencil was solid, other times the handprint was painted directly, palm and fingers pressed into pigment before touching the wall. For animals, they often began with an outline, drawn in black or deep red. The curves weren't guessed. They followed the stone surface so the contour of the rock became part of the figure. Shading was done by layering pigments, lighter tones for bellies, and darker tones for backs, creating depth. In some cases they scraped away a thin layer of the wall to reveal lighter stone beneath, using negative space as part of the composition. Engraving was another skill. Sharp flint tools cut into the rock to define muscles, fur lines, or movement. Sometimes engravings stood alone, catching the torchlight at just the right angle. Other times they were filled with pigment, the cuts giving the color more definition. And then there's animation, the illusion of movement. In Chauvet Cave, lions are drawn with multiple legs in slightly different positions, like frames in a flipbook. In flickering firelight, those overlapping legs might have seemed to run. Some scholars think the artists painted by torch movement deliberately, creating images meant to come alive in the shifting glow. Spray techniques gave texture to animal hides or the mottling on a horse's coat. Finger dragging left long streaks that suggested speed or flowing manes. In rare cases, artists used brushes made from animal hair bound to a stick, allowing for finer lines and details like eyes or whiskers. What's striking is the planning. You can see it in the placement, how a row of horses curves along a bend in the wall, how a bison's shoulder lines up with a bulge in the stone. These weren't random sketches. The cave was a collaborator in the work, its shape and texture guiding the design. The process wasn't quick. Pigment had to be applied in multiple passes, with drying or fixing between layers. In the damp chill of a cave, that meant returning again and again, perhaps over weeks or months. Imagine crawling back into the same chamber, lamp in hand, to add a shadow here, a hoof there. Each visit deepened the connection between artist and wall. Sometimes, alongside the animals, you find abstract shapes, dots, zigzags, ladder-like forms. These may have been made by pressing fingers into wet pigment or stamping with carved pads of wood or bone. Their meaning is still debated, but they appear often enough to suggest they were deliberate and important. You lean closer to a painted horse, noting the subtle shift in pigment on its neck. The line softens, fades, then reappears, exactly where the curve of the stone makes it seem like the animal is turning its head. The effect is so natural you almost expect it to move. Behind you, the tunnel waits, but the wall before you feels alive in a way that's difficult to put into words. You're not just looking at art, you're seeing the memory of a hand, the breath of a torch, the deliberate choices of someone who knew exactly what they were doing, and for a moment, you could almost believe they're still here, just beyond the edge of the firelight. Your guide lifts the torch higher, and the chamber opens into a sweep of wall where images crowd together like a silent procession. Here is where the story turns to what they chose to paint. The animals come first. Towering bison, their shoulders humped and heavy, horses with flowing manes, stags with antlers that spread like branching trees, mammoths lumber in thick outlines, their curved tusks sweeping past the heads of painted rhinos, bears and aurochs. Some species no longer walk the earth, their images the only record left of them in their prime. You can almost hear the thunder of hooves and the crash of horns. The choice of animals wasn't random. In many caves, certain species dominate. At Lascaux, horses are everywhere, their bodies in various poses, running, grazing, turning their heads. At Chauvet, lions, mammoths, and woolly rhinos rule the walls. In Altamira, bison are so prominent that the ceiling seems like a stampede frozen mid-gallop. Human figures are rarer. When they appear, they're often stylized or partial, stick-like bodies with exaggerated features or hybrids that blend human and animal traits. One haunting figure from the Shaft of the Dead Man in Lascaux shows a bird-headed man falling backward, perhaps in the middle of a hunt gone wrong. These images hint at stories, but they're locked away in a language we can only guess at. Then there are the handprints, dozens of them, sometimes in clusters, sometimes alone, red, black, yellow and even purple from blended pigments. Some are large and strong, others small enough to belong to children. They're the most intimate marks in the cave, each one an undeniable human presence, saying I was here. Alongside the animals and handprints are abstract signs, dots arranged in rows, lines crossing like ladders, spirals, chevrons, and shapes that look almost like grids. These symbols repeat across sites thousands of kilometers apart, suggesting a shared meaning or tradition. Some researchers believe they might represent seasonal cycles, migration patterns, or even a primitive form of notation, a way to record information before writing existed. You notice something else, the arrangement. Often, animals are grouped as if in relationship, a predator near prey or species that would never meet in nature sharing the same wall. The positioning might have been symbolic, not literal. Perhaps the artists were telling myths, or linking creatures in ways meaningful to their culture. The scale varies too. Some animals are small enough to fit in your palm, painted low near the floor. Others stretch meters long high above your head. The high ones would have required scaffolding or climbing onto ledges in near total darkness, a risky effort for an image. That tells you these weren't idle doodles. Every placement had value. Your torch catches on the smooth flank of a painted bison, its outline running right to the edge of a crack in the wall. The fissure becomes its outline, its curve perfectly matched to the animal's body. The rock wasn't a blank canvas, it was an active participant. It's strange, standing here, you realize you're looking at a worldview without words. Every figure, every symbol is a piece of knowledge, a shared story, or perhaps a spiritual belief. And though we don't speak their language, you can still feel the intention behind it. These weren't decorations, they were messages, preserved in darkness, meant for those who knew how to read them. Somewhere in the shadows ahead, there are more chambers, more walls, more voices. You step forward, leaving the bison and its crack behind, eager to see not just what they painted, but why. The passage narrows again, and you duck beneath a low arch of stone, feeling the damp brush your hair. When you straighten, the torchlight spills across a chamber where the walls are less crowded with animals but dense with shapes and arrangements that hint at something more deliberate. This is where the question of why they painted comes into focus, and where the answers dissolve into mystery. The simplest theory is that the paintings were a kind of visual diary, a record of hunts and important events. But the more you look, the less that fits. The animals are often drawn in peak condition, fat, strong, healthy, not limping from an arrow wound or lying dead. They're idealized, almost sacred versions of the creatures. That's why many researchers believe these spaces had a spiritual or ritual function. The caves might have been sanctuaries where people came to connect with forces they couldn't see, forces they believed shaped the hunt, the weather, even life itself. Painting a bison might have been a way to call its spirit, to ensure the herds would return. A cluster of horse images could be an offering to whatever power guarded their abundance. Some images seem placed to interact with the cave itself. A painted stag might be positioned so its antlers merge with the shadow of a natural rock projection. In flickering torchlight, the shadow could seem to grow, the stag's antlers reaching into the dark. It's easy to imagine chanting or drumming in the background, the sounds bouncing off the stone until the cave itself seemed alive. There's also the theory of initiation, young members of the group being brought deep into the cave for the first time, witnessing the art as part of a rite of passage. The journey into darkness, the sudden burst of color in the torchlight, the strange shapes and animal spirits, it would all serve to mark a threshold, the point where a child became an adult, a hunter, or perhaps a keeper of stories. The abstract symbols complicate things further. Their repetition across different caves suggests they were part of a shared visual vocabulary. Were they clan marks, representations of seasons, or moon phases, or something entirely outside our frame of reference? You imagine a group gathered here, the painter pointing to the marks while explaining their meaning to the young, or to visitors from another group, a silent language of lines and dots. Some of the most intriguing evidence comes from footprints found in cave floors. In several sites, tracks of adults and children are mixed together, sometimes alongside the paw prints of animals like bears or wolves. This suggests that painting sessions may not have been solemn exclusive rituals, but communal events where life and art blended together, where children watched, learned, maybe even added their own marks. And yet, not every chamber is accessible to all. Some require crawling through passages, so tight they'd intimidate anyone but the determined. These remote spaces often contain the most elaborate or mysterious images, were they meant only for a select few, perhaps shamans, leaders, or individuals chosen for their role in maintaining the connection between the human and spirit worlds. Standing here you realize the meaning may not be a single thing. It could have shifted over centuries, with each generation adding their own reasons for returning to these walls. What began as a simple representation might over time have become sacred, or what started as a spiritual act might later have been done for tradition's sake alone. Your guide shifts the torch, and the light catches a series of parallel lines etched into the wall. They're not beautiful in the way the animals are, but they're deliberate. You can't read them, but you know someone could once. That knowledge, the certainty that meaning was here even if you can't grasp it, feels both thrilling and frustrating. Somewhere deeper in the cave, more answers might wait, or more questions. Either way you keep walking, because in these walls every mark is a thread pulling you further into the story. The air grows cooler and heavier as you move deeper, and the torchlight reveals rough, uneven floors where your boots crunch on gravel and slip on patches of slick stone. This is the part you hadn't thought much about until now, the sheer challenge of making this art in the first place. These caves weren't designed for comfort. Some passages are so low you have to crawl on hands and knees, squeezing your shoulders through rock barely wider than your body. Others drop suddenly, forcing you to descend by gripping damp ledges with cold, stiff fingers. Carrying tools, pigments and fuel for the lamps turns each step into work. Imagine arriving here without modern gear, no helmet, no electric torch, just a flickering lamp made from a hollowed-out stone filled with animal fat and a wick of twisted moss. The light is dim, barely reaching a few meters, and the air is smoky, catching in your throat. Every few minutes you'd have to tend the flame, adding fat or adjusting the wick so it doesn't gutter out. Breathing is another challenge. In deep chambers with little air circulation, smoke from the lamps lingers, stinging the eyes and making each breath feel heavier. You can almost feel it now, your lungs working harder, your head light from the thin air, and all the while you're crouched or stretched awkwardly, trying to draw a perfect line on a cold, damp wall. The surfaces themselves aren't smooth, rock juts out unexpectedly, drips from the ceiling spatter your work area, and condensation runs down the walls, threatening to smudge fresh pigment. Sometimes the floor is uneven enough that you have to balance on a rock or crouch at an odd angle to reach your chosen spot. Painting the high sections meant improvising, stacking stones, using ledges or hoisting smaller people to do the work. And it's never silent, even here, in what feels like perfect stillness. You hear the constant drip-drip of water, the faint whisper of air moving through cracks, the shuffle of feet and the scrape of tools. In a group, voices echo strangely, bouncing in ways that can make a single whisper sound like it's coming from somewhere else entirely. That might have been unnerving or inspiring, depending on the mood. One wrong move in this darkness could mean injury, and injury could mean death far from daylight. A twisted ankle deep underground isn't a problem you walk off when you're living 20,000 years ago, yet they came here, again and again, risking the journey not for food, not for shelter, but to make art. In the deepest chambers you notice something subtle, the placement of paintings in areas where you can't see them all at once. You have to move, shift your torch, or change your stance to take it in. This forces you to engage with the space in a physical way, making the act of viewing as active as the act of creating. Perhaps that was part of the point. Your guide pauses at a narrow ledge, where the floor drops away into darkness. He steadies himself, then crosses with practiced steps. You follow, heart pounding, your torchlight catching on the wall opposite, a series of painted deer, each with antlers sweeping upward like trees in winter. You think about the painter standing where you are now, their own torch held high, their focus locked on getting those antlers just right while the drop yawns beneath them. The difficulty doesn't diminish the work, it magnifies it. Every mark here carries the weight of effort, discomfort and risk, and maybe that's part of what made the painting sacred. Nothing about this was easy, every image was earned. You step off the ledge into another narrow corridor, your breath still quick from the crossing. Ahead, the air feels different, almost stiller. The torchlight begins to reveal why. The stillness settles on your skin as you step into the chamber, a silence so deep you can almost hear your own heartbeat. The walls here are darker, not from shadow, but from time. This is where the paintings have endured for tens of thousands of years, shielded from the world by the cave's own breath. Preservation, you realize, is as much a part of the story as creation. These images have survived because the caves themselves are natural vaults. In places like Lascaux, Altamira, and Chauvet, the limestone rock maintains a stable temperature year-round, cool in summer, unfrozen in winter. The humidity stays steady, preventing pigments from cracking or fading. There's no wind to scour the surfaces, no sunlight to bleach the colors away. In some caves, thin layers of calcite have formed over the paintings, sealing them under a translucent skin of stone. It's like a glass case in a museum, except here nature is the curator. You lean closer to one wall and notice the faint shimmer of calcite, a veil that both protects and hides the image beneath. Without it, the pigment might have long since crumbled into dust. But preservation is fragile. The moment these caves are opened to modern visitors, everything changes. Human breath raises carbon dioxide levels, encouraging mold to grow. Body heat and extra humidity alter the microclimate. Even the faintest touch of a hand leaves oils that can stain or destroy the pigment. That's why so many famous caves are now closed to the public, their interiors recreated in full-scale replicas for tourists. Lascaux, for example, was sealed after only a couple of decades of visitation when green algae and black mold began spreading across its walls. Chauvet has never been open to the general public, with scientists allowed inside only for limited periods under strict protocols. The art's survival depends on keeping the environment exactly as it has been for millennia. You think about how strange it is that the very act of looking, the impulse that connects you to the artist, can also be what destroys the work. The people who painted these walls surely wanted them to be seen, but they couldn't have imagined that thousands of years later, the danger would come not from weather or animals but from us. Preservation also means loss. Many painted caves around the world have already been destroyed, flooded, collapsed, or eroded away. In some cases, the only record left is a sketch or photograph made decades ago, and there's the haunting thought of the caves, still hidden, their paintings sealed behind rockfalls or buried beneath layers of earth, their stories safe but silent. The walls here have been lucky. The lines are still sharp, the colors still rich, a bison's back arches in perfect silhouette, a horse's mane seems to ripple in a wind that hasn't blown here in 20,000 years. You're seeing what the painter saw when they stepped back from the wall and lowered their torch. The torchlight glances off a corner where mineral deposits have started to spread. It's a reminder that even here, untouched by crowds, time is always at work. The caves will keep these images for as long as they can, but nothing lasts forever. Your guide stands quietly for a moment, as if paying respect, then he turns toward a narrow side passage. You follow, knowing that the next chamber holds something else. Stories not just of preservation but of fame. The side passage curves gently, the floor smoothing under your feet, until the space ahead blooms into a vast, vaulted chamber. Your torchlight catches the sweep of an image so large you have to tilt your head to take it in. This is one of those places whose name has traveled far beyond archaeology journals, one of the legends of prehistoric art. You've heard of them: Lascaux, Chauvet, Altamira, names spoken like they're sacred, because in a way, they are. Each site is a masterpiece, a time capsule, and a mystery all at once. Standing in one now, you can see why. At Lascaux, discovered by 4 teenagers and a dog in 1940, the Great Hall of the Bulls steals the breath before you even understand why. Bulls over 5 meters long stride across the limestone, their bodies layered with careful shading that makes them swell with life. Horses and deer weave between them, arranged like they're part of a single living tapestry. And then there's the unicorn, an animal no one has seen in the fossil record, a hint that imagination too found its place on these walls. Chauvet, found in 1994 and kept almost entirely off limits, is older still, around 32,000 years. Its lions prowl in packs, their eyes sharp, their muscles caught mid-hunt. Rhinoceroses clash horns in lines that vibrate with movement. The artists here had mastered perspective and overlapping forms millennia before art history began. The place feels less like a gallery, and more like a dream or a memory you've inherited from someone you never met. Then there's Altamira in northern Spain, where the bison on the ceiling are so vivid that when the cave was first shown to academics in the late 1800s, many refused to believe they were prehistoric. The ceiling's natural bulges were used to shape the animals' bodies, making them appear three-dimensional. It wasn't until similar finds were made elsewhere that the skeptics surrendered, and Altamira took its rightful place as one of the great treasures of the Ice Age. Each of these sites has its own personality. Lascaux feels like a grand gathering, with animals arranged in almost theatrical scenes. Chauvet has an intensity, its predators giving it the air of a place where survival was always on the edge. Altamira feels intimate, the ceiling low, the paintings close enough to make you feel you're part of the herd. But there are others less famous yet equally extraordinary. Pech Merle, with its spotted horses and human handprints. Cosca Cave, accessible only through a submerged tunnel, its entrance drowned when sea levels rose. Tour de Dodubert, where 2 clay bison, modeled by hand, still stand in the darkness, untouched for 15,000 years. What unites them isn't just the art, it's the sense that each was chosen and returned, generation after generation. The caves became more than shelters, they became archives of identity. Standing here you tilt your torch upward and catch the gleam of a horse's flank in the curve of the wall. The rock bulges just enough to make the muscles seem to tense. You feel for a moment like you're inside the same creative moment the artist was in, as if the centuries have dropped away. Your guide says nothing, there's nothing to add. In a place like this, words don't compete with the images. You simply look, and keep looking, until you feel the urge to move on to the next chamber, where the past might be even older. The torchlight flickers as you step into a narrower corridor, its walls bare at first. The silence is heavier here, as if the air hasn't moved in centuries. Then around a bend, the paintings reappear, but these aren't the ones in every museum book. These are newer to our eyes, found only in recent decades, each discovery rewriting what we thought we knew about the world's first artists. Some of the most surprising have come from far beyond Europe. In Sulawesi, Indonesia, scientists uncovered red ochre hand stencils and a depiction of a warty pig. Yes, a warty pig, that's at least 45,000 years old. That's older than many of the famous European works, forcing archaeologists to rethink the idea that sophisticated cave art started in the West. In Borneo, a reddish-orange painting of a banteng, a wild cattle species, has been dated to over 40,000 years ago, and in the Kimberley region of Australia, the ground figures, tall, elegant human shapes, adorned with tassels and elaborate headdresses, stretch across rock faces in scenes that feel almost ceremonial. These may not be in deep caves, but their preservation is just as remarkable, protected by the dryness of the rock shelters. Africa, too, holds ancient treasures. In Namibia's Apollo 11 cave, slabs of rock bear images of animals painted in black and white pigment over 25,000 years ago. In South Africa's Blombos cave, abstract engraved ochre pieces date back over 70,000 years, long before most known figurative art, showing that the impulse to create symbolic marks is as old as modern humanity itself. Some of these recent finds have been pure luck: a collapsed section of rock revealing a hidden chamber, a hiker sheltering from rain, noticing faint shapes in the stone. In other cases, technology has led the way: high-resolution photography, laser scanning, and even drones mapping cliffside shelters no human could safely reach. The discoveries aren't always grand murals. Sometimes they're a single handprint, a few lines of pigment, or an engraved form hidden beneath layers of mineral deposits. But even the smallest find can shift timelines, proving that art was part of human life much earlier, and in many more places than once believed. There's something thrilling about that, isn't there? The idea that somewhere right now, in some untouched cave or cliff overhang, a painting waits in the dark. It might be older than anything we've seen, it might show an animal no longer known to science, or it might be something we can't even interpret, proof that the minds of our ancestors held ideas we still can't decode. Your torch catches on a section of wall where the pigments have faded to near invisibility. A modern camera could pull the lines back into view, but to your eyes, it's just a ghost of an image. You wonder how many paintings we've walked past in broad daylight, never noticing, because they've faded to whispers. Every new discovery adds another thread to the global tapestry of cave art, reminding you that this wasn't a one-time invention, but a shared instinct. Wherever early humans went, they carried not only tools and fire, but the desire to leave a mark, and the earth, in its hidden corners, still holds some of those marks safe, waiting for us to stumble upon them. Your guide steps aside, letting you pass into yet another stretch of tunnel. The walls here are etched rather than painted, and you sense the next chamber might hold a different kind of story, not just of beauty, but of disagreement. The tunnel twists like a corkscrew before opening into a chamber where the walls are less harmonious. Here the images seem layered, different styles, different techniques, almost like the artists themselves were arguing through the stone, and in a way that's exactly what modern archaeologists do. They argue about what all this means. The first big debate is about who made the oldest paintings. For decades, the assumption was that only modern Homo sapiens, people like you, created this level of symbolic art. Then came the shock. Uranium-thorium dating revealed that some red hand stencils and geometric shapes in Spain's El Castillo cave are at least 64,000 years old. That's 20,000 years before modern humans even arrived in Europe, which means Neanderthals might have painted them. Not everyone agrees. Skeptics argue that the dating could be off, or that the calcite measured might predate the art beneath, but the evidence keeps piling up: engraved bones, pigments, beads, all hinting that Neanderthals had symbolic expression too. If they did, it changes the story we've been telling about what it means to be modern. Then there's the question of why the paintings were made. Are they hunting magic, spiritual offerings, storytelling, education? Some scholars lean toward ritual, caves as sacred places where art connected humans to animal spirits. Others think of them as mnemonic devices, visual memory aids for seasonal migrations or dangerous hunting grounds, and a few see them as the earliest form of narrative, ancestors of the stories we still tell around fires and screens. Interpretation gets even murkier when abstract signs enter the picture. Anthropologist Genevieve von Petzinger catalogued hundreds of geometric symbols across European sites, dots, ladders, crosshatches, spirals, and found that the same 32 shapes recur again and again over tens of thousands of years. That could mean a shared symbolic language, but what it said is locked away forever unless some Rosetta Stone of the Paleolithic turns up. Even the methods of study spark debate. Should scientists enter the caves at all, risking damage for the sake of knowledge? How much should replicas replace the original experience? Some argue that once a cave is discovered, it's already changed forever. Others counter that without careful documentation, the paintings could vanish without leaving a trace in human memory. And then there's the question of ownership. Are these works part of world heritage, belonging to everyone, or do they belong to the nations and even more specifically to the indigenous or local communities whose ancestors may have created them? In Australia, for example, many rock art sites are actively managed by Aboriginal custodians, blending scientific conservation with traditional knowledge. Looking at the wall in front of you, you can almost hear the voices of disagreement, not from the ancient artists, but from the modern world, each trying to fit the paintings into their own framework of meaning. Yet the wall itself doesn't care. The bison stands where it has always. The handprint still reaches outward, palm open, without offering an explanation. Your guide's torchlight lingers on a small, faint engraving near the floor, a set of crossed lines inside a circle. No one knows what it means. But you can't help thinking that in another 30,000 years, someone might look at our symbols, our signs, logos, emojis, and feel the same puzzled curiosity. From here, the chamber narrows again, but you sense the next part of the journey will expand outward. The paintings in this cave are just one piece of a story that spans the entire planet. The tunnel breathes you out into a broad chamber where the air feels lighter, fresher. The torchlight sweeps across the walls, but here the animals are different, not the familiar bison and horses of Europe, but creatures from far-off lands. This is where you realize the story of the first painters isn't bound to a single place. It's a global story, carried on countless journeys across continents. In Australia, ancient rock shelters stretch back tens of thousands of years. The Gwen figures of the Kimberley region, slender, elongated humans adorned with tassels, belts, and feathered headdresses, look almost as if they're stepping into a dance. Nearby, the Wandjina figures loom with broad, halo-like heads and no mouths, painted in white and outlined in red or black. These aren't just depictions of people, they're living ancestral beings in Aboriginal cosmology, maintained and repainted over generations. In Africa, the Drakensberg Mountains in South Africa hold rock paintings of eland antelope, shamans, and trance scenes that date back thousands of years. They're not tucked away in deep caves, but placed on cliff faces and open shelters, part of the San people's living tradition. In the Sahara, long before it was a desert, vast panels depict cattle, giraffes, crocodiles, proof of a green, thriving landscape. In North America, sites like the Pecos River region in Texas reveal sprawling murals of human and animal forms in ochre, white and black, often hundreds of feet across. In Canada's Quetico region, canoe-accessible cliffs are marked with ochre paintings of moose, fish and spirit figures, their pigments still bright against the granite. In South America, the Cueva de las Manos in Argentina explodes with handprints, thousands of them stenciled in reds, blacks and whites, dating back over 9,000 years. The walls feel alive with overlapping palms, as if every visitor wanted to add their own voice to the chorus. In Brazil's Serra da Capivara, vivid scenes of hunting, dancing and rituals stretch across shelters that may be 25,000 years old, challenging old timelines of human arrival in the Americas. Asia holds its own wonders. In Siberia, petroglyphs carved into cliff faces show mammoths, elk, and hunters with bows. In India's Bhimbetka rock shelters, paintings span tens of thousands of years, with layers showing transitions from Ice Age fauna to scenes of farming and warfare. What's striking is that while the animals, tools and landscapes change, the impulse stays the same: to leave a mark, to tell a story, to connect with something beyond the moment. Whether in the flickering dark of a limestone cavern in France, or under the glaring sun on a sandstone cliff in Namibia, humans kept turning stone into story. You can almost imagine the migration trails, the trade routes, the campfire conversations that spread techniques and ideas across generations and continents. Maybe a visitor from another group saw hand stencils for the first time and brought the idea home. Maybe a traveling hunter saw how pigments clung better when mixed with fat and shared the trick 1,000 miles away. The walls here seem to echo with those connections. Every mark, no matter where in the world it's found, belongs to a single human inheritance. And though the specifics of meaning may differ, the core message, the need to create, to communicate, remains the same. Your guide moves toward another opening, this one sloping upward. The air feels warmer here, as if you're heading toward the surface, but the paintings aren't done with you yet. There's still the story of what happened when we stepped out of the caves and carried art into the open world. The slope rises under your feet, and the air begins to shift, less damp, a hint of warmth seeping through the stone. The torchlight stretches forward into a space where the walls are bare, and for a moment you think the paintings have ended, but no, the art has simply moved on. You're standing at the threshold between the enclosed, timeless world of the cave and the wide, changing landscapes outside. This is where human creativity took a new turn. When the Ice Age ended and climates warmed, many caves that had been accessible became harder to reach, flooded by rising seas, sealed by rockfalls, or simply abandoned as people's lives shifted. But the impulse to make images didn't vanish. Instead, it flowed out into the open air, onto cliff faces, rock shelters, and even portable objects that could be carried from camp to camp. Rock art on exposed surfaces had to contend with the elements, so it often took the form of engravings and carvings, lines cut into stone to withstand wind and rain, but pigment still appeared where conditions allowed. In some regions, paintings moved higher up into sheltered overhangs where sunlight could reach, but storms could not. The effect was different. Art in daylight could be seen by anyone passing, not just those who braved the darkness. The subjects expanded too. While Ice Age cave walls were dominated by large wild animals, post-Ice Age art began to include smaller game, birds, fish, and more often humans. Scenes of daily life appeared, people hunting with bows, gathering plants, dancing in groups. Storytelling became more explicit, not just symbolic. In some cultures, the art began to record migrations, battles, and encounters with neighboring groups. Tools changed as well. As stone blades grew sharper and more refined, engravings became more intricate. Some surfaces were polished smooth before painting to make the pigments stand out. In portable art, bone, antler, and ivory became canvases, decorated with incised patterns or miniature carvings of animals and people. These could be carried, traded, or buried with the dead, ensuring the art traveled as widely as the people who made it. And yet, echoes of the cave tradition lingered. The hand stencil didn't disappear. It reappeared on rock faces in Australia, South America, and Africa, thousands of years after it first emerged in Europe. Geometric patterns persisted too, evolving but recognizable. Grids, zigzags, spirals, and dots still danced across stone in familiar sequences. There's a sense of continuity here, as if the first painters had lit a torch that would never go out. Each new generation found its own wall, its own reason to paint, but the connection to the deep past remained. A hunter in the Sahara, carving a giraffe into sandstone 6,000 years ago, may never have seen a Paleolithic bison, but both were part of the same long conversation between humans and their environment. As you stand at this point in the cave, halfway between shadow and sunlight, you realize you're also standing at the seam between two worlds. The hidden, sacred interiors where art was protected by darkness, and the open, communal spaces where it could be shared under the sky. Your guide steps forward, toward a sliver of daylight in the distance. The paintings are almost over now, but there's one last stop to make, to see how, even today, standing before these ancient images can stir something in us that hasn't changed in tens of thousands of years. The light ahead grows stronger until you're blinking, stepping out of the last narrow passage into a chamber where a single painted figure waits alone, framed by stone, as if placed here to greet the ones leaving. It's a horse, its head turned slightly, mane flowing in strokes, so sure you can almost feel the brush's bristles. You stand still, letting the torch die down to a faint ember, and for the first time you notice how quiet your own breathing has become. This final image feels like a farewell, not just from the cave but from the people who once stood here looking at the same wall. You imagine the last painter setting down their